All right, hello and welcome to CMO Confessions, powered by On24 and Esco Media. We're so excited to have you here. In this interview series, we speak with top marketing leaders to find out the biggest trends in their space, their biggest pet peeves, as well as their biggest confessions. I'm your host, Joe Escobedo, CEO and Chief Editor at Esco Media. Joining us today is Leandro Perez, who is the Vice President and CMO Asia Pacific at Salesforce. Leandro, good to see you again.
Likewise. Thank you for the opportunity, Joe.
Absolutely. Very excited. Now, before we begin, guys, we want to make sure this session is interactive and we're hearing from you guys. So if you have any questions for us, please let us know. We'll try to answer them later on. But we'll go ahead and kick it off with a confession. Now, we know that failure is a critical part of the marketing growth process. But can you think of a time where it didn't quite go to plan and maybe there was a valuable learning experience from it?
Well, firstly, I feel like I'm in church here using that kind of language. But look, there's always things that don't go to plan. And look, there's many stories I could share here. But I think one that has stuck with me for some time is in my prior role, before my current role here, I was working in San Francisco at Salesforce and was working very closely with our co-founder and now co-CEO, Mark Benioff. And I vividly remember I was working on the corporate messaging team, so we developed how we talk about Salesforce, and we were at the beginning of the season leading up to Dreamforce, which is our big event that we have once a year in San Francisco. And we at this moment in time need to prepare a new narrative for the year. What's going to encapsulate all the great work that we've had, all the innovation, what are the current trends, like bring that together for something new for the year. And I was working with my boss at the time, and we were struggling a little bit of what was going to beat what we'd done the year before, right? Every year it's like, trying to elevate the narrative and make it even better and better. And he had some ideas and I wasn't fully sold on them. And we talked about them. And at the time, I was responsible for presenting them to our CEO at the time. And I remember not being fully vested in them, right? I was like, I just don't believe this is the best story that we're going to tell this year. But, that was my job. And so I went in not fully confident that I had not only the best material, but that I was really bought into it. And I think our CEO could see through that at the time. And it didn't go well, right? The meeting did not go to plan. And my lesson from that was that no matter what any boss or person tells you, if you're not bought into it, if you don't have a point of view, you shouldn't be the one putting that idea forward, right? And I felt like that was a leadership lesson for me, that I should have probably asked my manager, hey, I'm not fully into this, maybe you want to present that. It's totally okay. I won't feel like you're stepping on my toes. And also that you should always have a point of view and that you should own it, right? Because if you own it, then if it doesn't work, then you will be comfortable that it was your idea and you can go back to the drawing board. But if it was never yours in the first place, then there's really nowhere for you to go. And so I remember that, and I now encourage that with my team, that they should always have a point of view whenever who they're talking to, whether it's me or another stakeholder, and that they should be fully embracing it.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like a ventriloquist situation where, you were the person speaking, but there was some ideas from the other side. And I think it's really good advice where, if you don't feel comfortable going into a situation, like have that conversation with your colleagues or your boss. Otherwise, like you said, it does shine through where the other person can see it, and, it affects the impact of the presentation. I'm curious, for people who are younger, who are maybe joining us, what are some ways in which they can get into the conversation earlier? You talked about maybe sharing their point of view, but is it more in terms of, hearing what the boss is talking about and then chiming in, or would you recommend that they be proactive in starting that conversation and sharing their point of view?
I'll always be proactive. You have to find your moment, right? You don't want to be that person that's just randomly saying things in a meeting that you're talking about something else. But if you're well-read, well-researched, you have a point of view of something, leaders always want to hear those ideas because they don't have their finger on the pulse all the time, right? Like back in the day, I was trying to be across all the latest trends in technology, whether that is in the particular market that you're in or another market that might be ahead of your market. I also am a big advocate of looking at other areas to get synergies of what's going on in other industries, to maybe catch a trend that isn't happening yet in your industry, but might be coming or might be relevant to yours. And so and now, fast forward to where I am today, I love hearing from people on my team, sharing points of views that I may not be caught onto, because that's where I can draw inspiration from now, right? We're all busy professionals. As you get more senior and more senior, you actually have less time to sit there and sort of ideate. And someone coming forward with an idea, even if it's just a seed at the time, is invigorating for people like me, because then I can be like, great, that's an awesome idea. Let me put a little bit of fuel on that fire and send you off and give you maybe some ammunition. Maybe you need resources or dollars or something to take it a little bit forward. And that's something that I or a leader can put forward. But those ideas don't come around every day. So absolutely find a moment, share your point of view, and make sure, again, to my first point, that you own it, right? If it's not a great idea and that the leader says, oh, it's not for us now, take it, right? And how can you then shape it and maybe come back another time when you've thought through it a bit further?
Great advice. And I think it's a good mark of a great leader as well, like you said, to admit that you may not know everything, or, you're still trying to learn what other people are doing, and, feeding that into the conversation. So I love that. Keeping on the confessions theme, I'd love to hear, what is a commonly held belief in your space that you passionately disagree with? And how do you navigate really going against the grain?
Yeah, look, I come across this a lot. We're all marketers and leaders, and I think sometimes people just drink the Kool-Aid a little bit too strongly and think that they are the person that they're marketing to. And the reality is that for most of us, we're not, right? If you're a marketer doing marketing, you're probably not an IT professional or a CIO. You may be a bit more aligned to a CMO if you're selling to that persona, but you're probably not a CEO. And so I think many times we get ourselves in this situation where we come up with an idea because we experienced it. We then talk to other peers of ours who are very much like us because they're doing the same role. They might even be your friends. So you might be going out to dinner with them, and you're in this kind of echo chamber where all you're hearing is validation for your probably terrible idea. And so then you go out and launch it to the masses, and then are bewildered why it doesn't work. And it's because you're really not talking to the people that are very much like yourself, right? You're talking to a very different buyer who might be in a different life stage, who might be living in a different geography, a host of reasons of why you maybe didn't hit the mark. So that's why I think it's extremely important that you get out of your office, which is easier now because not many people, I'm not in my office at the moment, but get out, be with your customers, be with them, whether that's at round tables, at events. Get out there and make sure you're hearing from them, and that you're constantly having that feedback cycle with them, because also as you become more friendly with them, they may start telling you and the things that you want to hear because they want to be included in things and be invited back. But actually having a whole collection of those folks that you can tap into, which I've learned from a lot of our leaders in San Francisco, where we have this amazing ecosystem and community at Salesforce that's very diverse, right? So it's people that are in different stages of their journey. They've come from different backgrounds. They might have different demographics. All of that adds to make sure that what you produce as a marketer is going to hit the mark.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, even in our kind of small little bubble in B2B marketing, you hear this, a lot of the same lingo and a lot of the same things. And you're like, oh, this is the way it is. But then when you speak to someone outside of that space, you're like, wait, why are you doing it that way? So I think that makes a lot of sense to me as well, too. And you talked about obviously spending more time speaking with your buyers to find out what are some of their challenges, and then, coming up with new ideas. I'm curious as well, too. So let's say that you are a larger organization or even a mid-sized organization, and you are targeting different people, let's say CFOs. Do you think it's worthwhile talking to your own internal CFO just to find out from their point of view what are some of the challenges and obstacles they're facing?
Absolutely. That's a slam dunk, right? Like, you have access to them. They understand, usually, hopefully, your business and your products, if they're a good one. And so I would say that's an easy one to start off, low hanging fruit. What I would say is obviously don't limit it to them. Like our CFO would be based in San Francisco, right? So immediately the challenges and pains that they're having maybe running a global organization might be different to what we have in Asia Pac, where a CFO maybe locally is a smaller company, or might be a regional CFO, or might be dealing with completely different macroeconomic factors, right? The whole US inflation thing that might be happening there may not be happening in Singapore or in India. We might have completely different challenges. So look, there's some baseline that absolutely you want to get internally, but then you have to go wider. And maybe you could even ask that CFO, hey, do you have some friends of yours or colleagues from your network that I can tap into, because they're going to have a better chance of getting you that access than you might yourself.
Actually, it's a really good tip as well too, because if you think of marketers, a lot of times we're all right connected to each other, so it's easier for us to exchange introductions and referrals. But for example, I may not have a lot of CIOs or CIOs in my network, for example. So leveraging on the people who are in that space to provide those recommendations, it needs to be so much easier to get their time versus then just reaching out to them, indirectly saying, "Hey, can I catch up with you over coffee or whatever?" So I think that's really, really good advice in leveraging your network and leveraging your internal employees to get some of those introductions.
Absolutely.
Because every year in B2B, people are always wondering what are the biggest trends, and people always have different thoughts and opinions. I'd love to hear from your point of view, what has been the most overrated B2B marketing trend, and instead, where are you focusing more of your attention on this year?
There's so many. And actually, now I was thinking about this a little bit this morning, and we've actually come out of the lockdowns for most of our markets, and there were many things that were surging during the pandemic that are now not. Right, like things that come to mind are obviously NFTs, Clubhouse. Does anybody use that anymore? Like I remember that being all the rage, last year, and those never-ending audio chats that I'm like, really, that goes on forever. I don't know when it ends. Okay, there's so many of those, but one that has caught my eye. Actually, just last week, I was in an event full of B2B marketers, and it seemed like every other session people were talking about ABM. Now, I won't, and I have to put a disclaimer. I'm actually a huge fan of ABM, and I've got a very talented team that run it for me in my region here. But I think what's happened is that it's become the latest buzzword. So there's obviously technology that can be sold for it now. There's consultants that want to show you that they're the experts in it. And so what's happened now is that they've kind of hijacked it, and there's a bit of guerrilla marketing going on anything that says ABM might get a bit more of attention. And the reality is that ABM is a strategy, right? It's a strategy and an approach to how you're going to be going to market. And what I think the risk is that someone might understand how to actually do ABM, but under the covers, good ABM requires good marketing, right? All the tactics that ABM will leverage will require experience and skill and a high quality of marketing tactic underneath it, whether that is creating content, whether that is stakeholder management, whether that is running events, whether that is setting direct mailers. All those things are actually principles and approaches that we've been practicing and refining for many, many years in our industry. And if you're not good at those, you're not going to be good at ABM. And so I think, it's a bit of a caveat, I would say, like not generally ABM. I think I agree with it, but I just feel at the moment there's a bit of saturation on it. So I would just be careful for other leaders who maybe haven't started. I believe the stats are still pretty low, actually, for how many teams are truly running proper ABM campaigns that don't get sucked into the hype of needing to buy just a piece of technology just to do it. Obviously, you understand why you're going to do it. Then make sure you have people that really know what it is. And then ultimately, under the covers, you should feel you can inspect and check that the quality of the work that's happening there is of what the standard that you would have done normally in the rest of your marketing team. And it should be of equal or higher quality. And I think that then would lead to a successful program.
Once again, I completely agree. I think this is something that has become quite a hot topic in the B2B marketing world, and everyone wants to talk about it. But like you said, very few people are doing it, and those who are doing it are may not doing it as effectively because, going back to your point, they don't have the basics in place. So they don't know how to do content marketing. They don't know how to run events properly. They don't know how to do some of the things that are fundamental to running an ABM campaign. Rather than, like you said, investing in the new technology or this new kind of concept, make sure you have the groundwork laid, and then you kind of integrate it to a ABM strategy that makes sense for your organization and your audience. So I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's one that constantly comes up. We have some lovely questions from the audience. So Candice asks, what are your thoughts on campaigns or marketing activities ran pan-regionally, or should most of it be local? What's your view on the balance between APAC versus local?
Okay, so APAC versus maybe a country within APAC, because usually in most companies it's like, hey, we're going to do a global campaign, and I have a lot of thoughts about that, right? So maybe I'll start there and then I'll come into that question. So look, I think there is a time and place for global things, right? Like, I've got my brand here, the logo. I'm not going to go and create my own Salesforce logo in APAC, right? There's some things like branding and specific campaigns that do make sense at a global level. You might even have approaches to digital and ABM that are sort of structured that you want to have in place before you go to local to the region. I think then at the regional level, I would say it depends on how you make up your region, right? I know that in APAC, we at Salesforce divide APAC into a few regions. We've got Australia, New Zealand, we've got the ASEAN countries, we've got India, Greater China. I think within those, there's definitely some similarities. I guess if your region included somewhere like Japan, though, which not all APAC markets or APJ markets do, that is pretty different again, right? So I would say at a pan-APAC level, just like at the global level, there are things that you want consistency with, and you can probably get 80% of the work done if you can centralize that, and there's efficiencies to be made there. If you have a team that thinks, I guess, in the spirit of local, right, that they're producing something that could scale. So I'll give you an example. When we're producing events for the APAC region, I can't just have Australian speakers because that's where I am, right? Or I can't just have Singapore speakers because that's where we're recording. You really need to ensure that the people that are producing the content are aware of some nuances from all the markets, having diverse voices to say, hey, you know what? This speaker would be great. They're from India. Okay, let's put them in. Let's balance that with someone maybe from Australia or Singapore. Maybe if you have an entertainer, that might be from a different part of the region. So I think you need people that are willing to have those honest conversations if you even can get to the 80%. I think for that last mile, though, we, and I'm not saying it's the only way, but at Salesforce do choose to go hyper local because that's where then you're really interacting with your local stakeholders there, and you usually have a sales team to talk to as well, where they want maybe a local customer that's specific to that country talking with a local sales leader, or you want a campaign that's referencing a local partner that can help you implement it. Or there's a specific trend or language that's happening in that market that just wouldn't resonate elsewhere. And I think that is important, but I don't think you need to start from scratch for all of that. Hopefully you've scaffolded down from maybe something global where you started off, maybe it was a report, then you bring it into the region, and with some synergies, you're able to add in some local cuts of data or something. And then you're at last mile where you could say, you know what, I'm going to drop in this hyper relevant local customer that will then make it sing to whoever receives that piece of material.
Advice for those who are mapping out the regional to local road mapping, like talked about some of the economies of scale and things you would leverage in a global and regional. And I completely agree with you on the local because I obviously follow you and a lot of your team members. And I was actually commending one of your team members recently because they put out a case study. And I love that I think it was a Vietnam financial services case study. And, it focused on a particular market, a particular industry, and a particular persona. So that's kind of like my, the holy grail of really localized targeted content. So I think I've constantly seen that from you and your team push that out because I'm on the other side hearing what some of these senior marketers and stakeholders are wanting, and they're saying, "Kate, tell me what people are doing in my industry or my geography, or what other B2B marketers doing, et cetera, et cetera." So once again, I think you guys are definitely practicing what you preach, and I see that a lot in the Salesforce marketing across the region as well as locally.
I'll add one point there as well. I think all of that said, there are times where you don't want to get too siloed in your lane where and I'll just pick an example, like a telco in Singapore may want to hear what a telco in Germany is doing, right? Just because maybe they're the number one player in their market, or they see all those other players and they see you as maybe giving them access to someone else. So I think sometimes, it's putting my global hat on. I did spend many years in San Francisco, like I mentioned earlier. Sometimes there is value in all of that makes sense, but what else can you do to give them access to something they're maybe not getting from anyone else, right? So if you do have customers in other parts of the world and you're bringing them to a global conference, don't try to be so siloed where it's all just going to be super hyper local, because maybe that customer or that prospect does want to hear something that usually you don't share with them because it's opening their horizon up. So it's a bit of a balance, right, with all these things that we do.
That's good advice as well too, because you mentioned a telco, and we've worked with some telcos, and one thing that some of the local telcos are trying to do, they're trying to expand in Europe, and they're trying to expand in the U.S. So at the same time, they're trying to figure out what some of the big American telcos, the big European telcos are doing. So I think if you don't have that understanding, you may just feed them local stuff, but they may say, hey, you know what, actually we're trying to expand into other parts of the region, other parts of the world, and so that may not be as relevant for what we're doing in our strategy. So I think it's something that we don't really talk about enough, but I think I'm glad you brought that up. Awesome. We have a few more questions from Amelia. She says, for different markets such as China and Japan, how do you start putting a go-to-market marketing plan and things to consider if we don't have a headcount to hire a local marketer there? That's a great question.
Yeah, yeah. Look, it's a tough one. Obviously, if it's a priority for the company or that you're in, obviously at some point there does need to be an investment, right? I think you can provide some tactics are easier to scale, right? Like you can do, press releases, you can do customer stories, you can run a website from other markets. You could even run a webinar, right, where you don't need to be in there, virtual events in particular. I think that you could do to kick things off, right? So you need to probably do some understanding the market. To my earlier point, you're not who you're marketing to. So you either need to be able to lean on some sales colleagues that are there or some folks that you might have in the region to give you some understanding of what's happening in the market, what's important. Maybe you could run a focus group there virtually, right? Some potential prospects just to hear a little bit from them. Once you have that understanding, I think you can cover some low-hanging fruit, like I mentioned, especially now in this new world of digital. It's not that hard, right? We're doing a webinar. I'm in my house right now. We could run a webinar where you grab a customer from anywhere in the world, right? You may not have a local customer yet. You could put on a webinar where you're talking about best practice. You might not even have a customer. You can use a product marketer that can just talk about your product, right? I think there are many things you can do to get things started. Potentially, you could have a local agency on the ground that could help you facilitate some of the motions if you want to do something more physical. I think, though, at some point then, though, if you've proven success, my advice as a leader would be, all right, you're going to go and talk to either sales stakeholder or your more senior marketing stakeholder to lobby for some representation there, because that's possible to do, but obviously you don't want to do that forever, right? Because you want to be able to be on the ground and build a presence and hopefully show the results and the impact of the work that you're doing.
I think it's some really practical advice in kind of testing the waters first, because I think many folks really want to, if they hear a specific market is growing really quickly, they want to put a person there as quickly as possible. And to your point, like I said, having even a webinar where you don't have to do even a physical event, you can have someone there, or, maybe it's not a customer, but, a partner or whatever it is, just to test the waters, see what the demand is like for, obviously your products and solutions and so on. And then, like you said, if there is enough demand and you see enough commercial rationale behind it, then maybe have something on the ground. But meantime, excuse me, working with, like you said, partners. I know some folks work with associations as well too. So if there's a specific association that's really big in that particular market, working with them first off to, like I said, get the understanding in terms of what's going on, and also to maybe gauge whether or not that your product or service makes sense in that particular market. So I think some really practical advice once again. Let's see, a couple more questions we have. Thank you guys so much for the questions. Really appreciate it. Keep them coming. Okay. Here's one fresh off the boat. It says, any learnings from your recent Salesforce World Tour event when it comes to running physical events? We're nervous. Did people show up? I know they showed up, but yeah.
Yeah, look, I think that, and I'll be honest here, anyone's worried. There's a moment in time if you're running a physical event. I remember we were there at 7 in the morning, right? You want to be the first ones there. And actually the Sydney event that we did, it was torrential rain. So it was pouring down. I think it's like the wettest day in like 40 years. And I was there thinking, oh my gosh, what have we done here? Like we were expecting, a few thousand people. We had everything ready. Everything was looking awesome. The venue was awesome. We had speakers, we had content, we had entertainment. But if people just don't want to go out because it's raining, like what do you do, right? So it happens to all of us. I would say luckily on that day, it was an amazing success for us. In fact, actually it was probably good that we had rain, because otherwise we would have blown through our capacity, and we limited it because of COVID restrictions, right? We did COVID testing and things before people showed up. But look, I think what I would say, so back to the sort of main gist of the question, what's happening now? I think you need to reevaluate this moment in time, just like you were during COVID, right? Like when COVID happened, I imagine all of you, like ourselves, we were evaluating, okay, we used to do physical events, we can't do those. Do we want to do nothing at all, right? And that's an option, it's always a chance. Do you want to do some other tactics, or do you want to maybe run digital events? And obviously many of us chose to run digital events. We did that successfully. I think the flip of that now is you have to think about, well, you've now had those 2+ years of experience of doing digital events, but you don't want to lose all those lessons. So yes, you may be able to do a physical event. All right, awesome. Why are you doing that? So really thinking about don't just go back to the status quo, but think about the basics here. Is it because you're trying to target a specific geography and you want to do it in that geography because you know if you do an event in Singapore or Thailand or Malaysia or wherever you do it, you can target those people and they will come. If not, they won't. So that could be a really important part for you, because if you can't do that, then you need to do it, right? So for us, one of the things we realized is when we opened up an event like a World Tour Sydney, we were getting people from Perth, which is the east part of Australia. We were getting people from Singapore dialing in, from India. We could do that. Now, we can't do that if we just go back to that exact same way that we were doing. So our thinking was, if that other audience that we had gained during the pandemic was important enough to us, then we should go hybrid. But for some people, the answer will be, actually, no, if we put on an event in that city, we can probably get 90% of the people that we want. Fine, just do physical only. If you want to continue to tap into maybe new markets that you've had, or there's people that you've now reached that they're not coming, they've moved away, or maybe they're just in this basket of like, oh, I can't, it's so hard for me to get out of my house, or maybe they can't, right? Maybe there's still some people that have limitations, right? Whether there are potential reasons why they can't be out in public, and they might still get COVID, right? And they don't want that. So if that's the case, then you may want to consider either a purely digital or hybrid. For us, we chose hybrid for that effect. But just know that if you're going hybrid, you can't go back to the old ways where it's just a camera on the wall and, hey, tune in, and it's a really poor experience, right? You want to make sure that that experience feels as special to them as it was when you were doing it during the pandemic, where you may have set a new bar. And that's what we did. We chose to have pre-show and post-show anchors. They were professionals, that's all they do, right? So that the quality was there, it was engaging, it was a bit more like TV broadcasts. We had a specific part of the broadcast that was only unique content to those folks. So we had an interview with our performer, Bernard Fanning, lead frontman from Powderfinger. He only spoke at the end for the people on the broadcast. We did not show that in the room. And we made that as a decision because we thought, how do we make this moment unique and special for that audience who may not have all the things that we have in person on the ground at the physical experience, and make sure that they want to come back and that they were excited just as everybody else was that was turning up in person. So not an easy question. I think the good thing is it's an exciting time to be in marketing. It's an exciting time to be leading events because you do get to reinvent the wheel. And that's what keeps me excited. That's why I like my job, is that you get that creativity. You get to use the analytical part of your brain as well to work out the numbers, because if the numbers don't stack up, don't do it. And then obviously if you pull it off successfully, it's a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I love the idea of creating exclusive content for the people who are watching it maybe virtually. This is something I hadn't heard about as well too. So I think great advice for everyone listening. Thanks so much, guys, for the questions. They're flooding in, so really, really appreciate all the support. Natasha asks, what trends are you seeing in the evolution, of content to maintain engagement and relevance in marketing execution? That's a big one.
That is a big one. And I guess content's pretty broad, right? So it can be written, it can be video. Look, I would say in general, and I'll answer it shortly because I think I could go quite long on this. I have seen a continued march towards video, right? I think there's still a place for copy, right? Whether that's your blog or whether that's on your website. But most people's attention spans are being trained by the other products that they use, right? Which is social networks. And we know where most of those are going. And most of those are going to very, very short form video. And so you're competing with that, even though they may not be related to your product, that's just the experience being shaped by other factors beyond what you're doing. So I have been pushing my team in particular to really lean in on not only just the video itself, but how can you use that video to cover some of the things that you were doing before. So you might have a blog. Can that blog have some video content in it? Right. So you still have the blog, and some people do like to read it. So that some people ingest information that way. It's also better for SEO and things like that. But can you put some highlights or something that you have created in there? So it's someone talking about a report, or someone just having a point of view on it, or if it's a customer, can you interview them, right? I think the second trend is beyond video, is just the cadence and speed of it, right? No one is tuning in to 2-hour events that are speaking about one topic, right? You need to be mixing it up. I think if you share it on social, it probably needs to be more like 5 minutes. And even that's pretty long. If you just want to tease it, you probably need less than 30 seconds. And so I think you just need to be evaluating what are the trends of the consumption of that content, and then marry it back to, well, how do you create content that can fit into those trends of consumption? And you don't have to get all your messages across. And I think this is a key skill that some folks earlier in their careers, they try to tell you everything about all the things that they are thinking in one piece of content. And the key is you're only trying to get someone to the next step. So if you can entice them and excite them about a particular item in 5 minutes, stop there. You don't need to go any longer, right? And then last but not least, make sure the quality is high. Again, you're competing with Apple TV, Netflix, Amazon Prime, all these highly polished, big budget Hollywood production things. You come in with some, poorly lit, bad audio kind of experience, no one's going to tune into that. Or if they do, they're not going to come back. So I think that's probably where I would say, even though you can go anywhere with content in general.
Absolutely. I think, a lot of times we're vying for attention from, like you said, Disney Plus or Netflix or TikTok, not just our competitors. So I think a good practical takeaway for the folks listening. More questions flooding in. Thank you guys so much. I see a friendly face here. Hui ask, what's been your biggest lesson learned as a CMO that has shaped your thinking? Once again, big questions you guys are asking here.
That's a huge question. Look, I don't know if there's one single lesson, but I would say the more and more I learn about marketing, the more I learn that it's also about running a successful team, right? So while I love marketing and being creative and all the things I've talked about, I've had my hands into, I think my biggest lesson is that you can't do any of that at scale without an incredible team. And we're in an interesting time now where people have choice, where they work, how they work, what they want to work on. And it's becoming harder and harder as a manager even, or as a CMO, to make sure that you're balancing that sort of need of the person with your priorities as a company and what you're trying to push forward. So I think what's shaped me is that there is no finish line to that, because every day something changes, right? So now, okay, some people may want to work from home. Great. Okay, so you allow people to do that. Next, you realize, well, people are losing connection with each other and you want to have strong bonds. Okay, do you bring them in once a week or once a quarter? Okay, so maybe you start doing that. Then you realize, well, if your team is a bit bigger and geographically spread, there's some people that aren't coming in and others are getting more, attention than others. And so how do you do all of that and think about it? Because at the end of the day, if you have people that are really excited about the company that they're working for and really passionate about the work that they're doing, they're going to create incredible things that you as a leader can leverage, right? And that's what's going to make you successful, right? I think my biggest takeaway from the last couple of years is if I can inspire my team to do great things, then my job is done. Because as one person, you could do something great, but as a team, you can really achieve and scale new heights. So I think that for the folks that are listening out there that do aspire to be CMOs, I would just share that it is not just about the marketing. Of course, that's very, very important. And you need to be aware of all the things going on and have a point of view. But at the end of the day, you're really becoming more senior business leader. And that involves people at the end of the day. And so if you can really master the art of managing and keeping people happy and empowered, then I think you'll be a great leader and CEO.
I think it's a great answer, and this is something I tell my students as well too. The higher you go in the career, the more interpersonal relationship skills and managing teams is more important than say maybe technical. So I think really good advice. Um, Nicola asks, what has been the most effective ways you've worked with sales teams? Ooh, good question.
Look, I think, and look, obviously the running joke is always that marketing and sales have, a lot of tension, and it's usually because they're the two sort of growth engines of the company, right? You're either growing the company in marketing, and then you're taking down accounts, you're growing, you're scaling, and I think both of those functions need to do that symbiotically. I think my major takeaway there is, to your point just now, Joe, is relationships, right? I think if at the end of the day you're dealing with people, and if you have a senior stakeholder who is running a sales team, or even just an individual who is a sales executive, you're ultimately working together to make the company successful. And so if you're listening to how you can help them, and then you're also telling them how they can help you, I think that's the bit that a lot of marketers miss, right? Because if you're only subservient, then I don't think you're being a great marketer, or will ever be a great leader. I think together, listening in that dialogue, you can push each other to find the things that are important to you both and be very clear, right? I think for us in marketing, it's very clear that we know in advance what are the expectations, so that we can't do everything tomorrow. Things take time to plan. So being very clear that we may need some priorities from their side, so that we can then go back and work out the best way to tackle that. And then from their side, they're probably expecting that you deliver on the things you say, right? So if you say you will do X number of things, and it's obviously not about the volume, but if you're saying you're doing an event here and you're going to scale that region there, and you're going to launch a big customer asset, and you don't do any of those, or you do them and they don't really hit the mark, then there's not going to be confidence there or trust there too. So I think at the end of the day, being very clear with each other, making sure those dialogue lines are always open. I think in an environment like now, especially where people aren't seeing each other in the office, it's really important that there's a constant line of communication. And then something that I always tell my team, because we do it every week, is spend about 10% of the time of reporting back what you've done, right? Because I think it's really easy for us to do a lot of work that takes a lot of time, and for folks that are not in the weeds or in the trenches to not realize how complicated, difficult, or how much work it was. So I'd say spend about 10% of your time always reporting up, sideways, wherever your matrix reporting line works, sharing, here are the things we've done, or here are the things we're working on, and the things that you're proud of. And also sharing if there's some areas of concern and what you're doing to correct them. I think that keeps a healthy line of conversation going. Don't feel afraid to share if there's something not working as well, because people will know. You just think they don't know, but they'll actually know it's not working. And that's better that it comes from you, so you can control the narrative.
Absolutely. We have tons more questions coming in. Sophie and Andre, I promise I will get to your questions. Andre is actually my son's name, so I have to get to that at the very end. So stay tuned for that. But sticking on the theme of influencing and managing teams, Candice asks, how do you influence business stakeholders and convince them of the value of top of the funnel marketing activities, focusing more on brand awareness campaigns, since it doesn't drive maybe immediate business results that they would see more on bottom of the funnel activities that are more focused on lead gen?
Right. And did it say which stakeholder, or did it just say stakeholders in general?
It said just influence business stakeholders.
Business stakeholders. Okay. Look, it's an age-old question. I think people always want to cut corners and reduce things that they don't think are directly impacting the bottom line or the top line. So I think I will just say it's not easy anywhere, right? I think you need to be able to do a couple things though. One, back to my very beginning conversation, is have a point of view, right? If you have a point of view about why you want to do it, and have some data to back it up, there is some data out there, right, that you can use to show that, hey, by consistent branding and sort of air cover of a particular brand, these brands, and usually actually in times like COVID, can leapfrog and take advantage of a category and really come out in front. So there are case studies, there are things that you should know. I think the other way, obviously, is that you can start doing some of it at a small scale and just show early wins, right? Find out who those influencers look to ask them, if they thought it was successful. Because those people that you're talking to usually have their trusted confidants who they might go, did you see that brand campaign, or did you see that ad? What did you think about that, right? If you can find out who they're talking to and trying to talk to those folks, or maybe it's a group of folks that they're talking, maybe they're talking to customers, which is not a good thing if you're doing something and the customer's not seeing it, right? I think it's important to know those, because if you then know those, you can be armed and prepared when you're having those conversations to say, hey, we were talking to this person or that group, and they really loved an early version, or they saw this thing, or this gave them more confidence. And then last but not least, I would say, we do this at Salesforce. We have a quarterly benchmark, right, where we're measuring certain things that we want to see, whether it's unaided awareness, aided awareness, it's against competitors. And we report on that every quarter. And we also have to educate people on what these numbers mean. So look, not an easy one, I would say. I would just start off there. But I think there are things to be able to help. And I find if you ask any CMO, unless the CEO who used to be a CMO, they'll be having similar conversations, but they're probably having it with the board, for example, instead of a normal sort of stakeholder in the business. And it's an ongoing battle, but hang in there and keep up the good fight, I would say.
Awesome. Great question, guys. I love it. And wonderful answer as well, too. Going back to teams, circling back, someone asked, if you're building a marketing team from scratch, what would you recommend being the first hire? Great question, guys.
Ooh, I guess it depends on your skills, right? Because you want to hire people, especially if you don't have many of them, that complement yours. There's no point really getting someone that can do exactly what you could do. So if you're an amazing experiential content event kind of person, then you probably want to hire someone that's a bit more analytical, digital performance sort of measurement sort of style, and can work those tactics, I would say. If you're flip, right, if you're very hyper focused on digital campaigns and you understand SEM, SEO, all those things, but couldn't run an event or create a piece of content to save your life, then that's probably the kind of person you want to hire. And also, it also depends on the product and the category you're in. Obviously, some products like B2B software usually does require some sort of executive level investment and involvement. So you are going to need to run in person, whether it's dinners, roundtables, activations. And so you want someone that can help you with that. But if all you're selling is a $50 item that's completely transactional, then you're not going to be running those kind of things, right? So I would say look to yourself to see your skills to complement them, and then also make sure that you're investing in the areas that will actually help you succeed. And always hire people smarter than you, because they're going to help you succeed.
I was just say, I imagine that's quite difficult for you. I imagine that's a very small pool, but yes, I think good advice for people listening.
Well, smart can be defined in many ways, right? Like I'll give you an example, and I won't mention names because it'll embarrass the person. But when I was in my role in San Francisco, it was a global team, and we were going to many countries to roll out the Salesforce corporate message. So I could do that really well in English. If we ever went to Latin America, I could do that there because I speak Spanish. But when we were hitting France, I was a bit out of my zone, right? So one of the people that joined my team could speak French, could speak Japanese, could speak even Korean. And as we were going to some of these cities, I was like putting her forward. She could work with the local team. And being smart doesn't just necessarily mean IQ, right? It means being able to do things that you can't as well, right? And do them better than you. So there's always someone that can do something better than you in marketing or in business in general.
I think it's a good lesson for all of us. Like you said, find the gaps and find people who have maybe different or better skill sets than you, bring them on board and highlight them in certain situations. So great advice, guys. Let's see a couple more questions and then we'll wrap things up. Let's see. Good question. What are you looking for from your agency partners? Plus, how can agencies support your team in the marketing function, gain credibility with the board? Wow.
Ooh,
two questions.
Okay, so hold on. We'll do that in two parts. So how can agencies support? Look, I think I expect a lot from agencies because I also treat them really well, right? So I expect that an agency is completely honest with me on the capabilities they have, how much things will cost, and that they will deliver things on time, and that they will deliver, obviously, products and services at a level that I expect, a quality level, right? And so if it's an agency, obviously, that's just producing maybe one PDF or an ebook, then obviously that's a transaction and it's a little bit different. But if you've got a type of agency that's become integral to your team, that's really like an extension of your team, maybe filling in that maybe you don't have an events team, or maybe you don't have a video production team, or maybe you don't have a social team, and you've hired an agency to help you fill that gap. I would expect, kind of like what I talked about with the relationship with sales, that you're having dialogue where you're sharing expectations, they're sharing back with you what they can and can't do, and being very honest about those. And I hate folks that overpromise and underdeliver. And so I think the other way around is much, much better. And and hopefully those agencies can surprise you with the quality and continue to make sure that they're bringing things to you that you didn't even know were possible, right? If they're able to deliver new experiences or bring new technology, or like we were talking about before, share new points of view, just like the individual contributor can, that's amazing, right? Because again, you're not going to turn down an amazing idea. You're not going to turn down good work if they're supporting you. I think the other part of it is some agencies over time tend to lose a bit of focus. They're obviously looking to find the next client. And usually you can tell when an agency is kind of treating you in a way that they're taking you a little bit for granted. And so I think it's important to build into a calendar like resets, where you're either meeting in person, whether it's quarterly, just to review, kind of like what I was talking about, where you would review it with a stakeholder for sales. They should be sharing back with you. We accomplished this, we did this. Is this still your goal? Are we still aligned there? Are you happy with that? Because I think that continual feedback loop, just like any relationship, will make sure that things, there's no surprises on both sides, I would say. And then repeat the second part of the question, because I want to make sure I get that right around the board there.
Yes. Looks like it's missing now, but it was around how can an agency partner help you build credibility with the board? So what can they do to support you to help you build credibility with your board?
Yeah, look, it depends on what kind of agency they are, right? But I think anyone going in front of the board wants to make sure that they're impressing usually their boss, the CEO, as well as the board themselves. And so going into that, you want to make sure that you're looking like you're in total command of your function or your area of expertise. And you want to come in with fresh, new ideas, hopefully, that are going to take the brand or the business forward. And so an agency can help with that with many ways, right? If you're pitching a new digital strategy, maybe it's a new website and a whole new approach, then the agency hopefully has produced high quality renders of what you're doing and has given you all the ins and outs of when it's going to be ready by, how much it will cost. So I don't think it's anything special there. You would expect all of that in a normal relationship, but just absolutely putting your best foot forward to make the person successful. Because at the end of the day, just like you always want to make your manager, do well and be successful and shine in front of their boss, an agency should do the same for you. I found some agencies want to sort of take the limelight and sort of reflect it back on them. The reality is, in a board setting or a CEO setting, they don't care about who the agency is. And I hope I didn't hurt anyone's feelings there, but they care about the ultimate success of their business. And so if someone's standing in front of them and presenting that, they want that representative, hopefully the employee, to really know what they're doing. And I think that is the role of anyone who's supporting someone going into a room like that. That's very daunting, right? It's a situation where decisions are made that can impact not only that person, a whole department, or a whole company for many, many years to come.
Absolutely. And just adding on that, one piece of advice I got earlier in my career was my boss told me when I was in the agency side is, one of your jobs is to get your client promoted. Like that should be one of your primary KPIs, is you make them look so good in their organization that they're, growing in their career. And obviously it's going to help you as well on the agency side, but that should be your focus. So going back to what you're saying. So thank you for sharing that. I hope all my
agency partners are listening. I hope they're all listening on this one.
I was gonna say, hopefully they are, because like I said, it sounds like there's a good collaboration there. Couple more $1 million questions, and then we'll wrap things up because I know you're quite busy. Second to last question is, what keeps you up at night? And I'm sure there are many things, but what's that one thing that really keeps you up at night?
I take my sleep seriously, so not many things keep me up, but I know the spirit of the question. It's really important, folks, that you get your sleep for your wellness. Hasn't always been the case. I've had some roles that are very difficult or where you're traveling a lot. Look, I think what keeps me up is I'm someone that has very high standards for myself and for my team. And I'm always thinking about what's next in all facets of all dimensions of my role. And I think that means that you're never resting, because you can never finish, never cross the finish line on any of them, right? So to give you an example, I'm always thinking about, what can I do to make sure that my boss really understands what our team is doing, right? What can I do so my stakeholders are really aware of everything we have in market, and so they truly understand the value that we're delivering? This next event that might be coming up, how are we going to raise the bar again? Like, what are we going to do? And if you've just done one like we did, what's next, right? So I'm constantly evaluating a spectrum of all these dimensions that are important to me. And I'm trying to, I guess, meditate a little bit on what's next and how I can raise the bar. And that's what keeps me going, and why I get excited every day jumping out of bed, because I know that there's always more work to be done. And then I go looking, to tie this back to the conversation, the question we had before, I go looking for inspiration. So whether that comes from a person on a meeting on my team who might say, hey, Leandro, have you seen this new TikTok dance? Like, it's incredible. Why don't we do that? Or maybe I talk to my son, who's massively into gaming and YouTube, and he's telling me all the trends that are going on there. Or I throw on a podcast that's talking about the opportunity for some new style of marketing. That's why I think if you're not open to it, you will hear it. But if you're not thinking about it, you're just going to be heads down doing the next thing. So that's how I like to reframe going to bed. And, I also do that for my personal life as well. But a quote that I'll end that question on, that our former CFO, always know your CFO, it's a good person to know, used to say was, better, never done. And basically what it meant is, no matter how good the quarter was, how good the project was, you can always do better, right? And that keeps you motivated to do more.
Awesome. Better never done. I want to take that to heart. All right, guys, we have time for one last question. People see the library you have in the background. So Andre and Sophie, this one's for you. Hope you guys are still with us. They're asking, what is the book that you're reading or that you would recommend for some of us on today's webinar?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I'm reading, I've had it for some time, but it was such a big book that I put it off for a while. It's the Tim Ferriss Tools of Titans. So he's gone and interviewed a whole bunch of people in very different walks of life, trying to get their secrets to success. But I would say one that's been impactful recently to me, just because it relates to what I was talking about before with teams, and it's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And it basically just goes in, it's a very short book actually, about how certain personalities that all seem to appear in every team that you go into, if not rectified as a leader, will mean that you won't succeed eventually or be as efficient and successful as you want to be. And so I'd recommend it for any aspiring managers out there, or even anyone who's in a team. It's not easy to do the things that they say to do in it, but if you can accomplish those things, I think you can have a very, very successful team and really take on any challenges.
Well, wonderful. Hopefully the guys have some new book recommendations they can take to heart. Awesome. Well, that I think we're going to go ahead and conclude today's session. I really, really appreciate you sharing all your insights and experience with us today. You can tell by the reaction from the audience, they still have questions, but like I said, we want to be respectful of your time. So thank you so much once again.
Well, thank you, Joe. And folks, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'd be happy to connect and follow the conversation there. Thanks again, folks.
There you go. And thank you guys so much for watching today's episode of CMO Confessions. Stay tuned for the next one. And we really appreciate you guys' support and all the love you guys are sharing with us today. So see you in the next one. Take care, everyone. Bye, guys.